Hey there, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you unwind with a relaxing story. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, let the rain and wind create the perfect atmosphere for your sleep. Sam Jenkins had always considered himself a man of the outdoors, but the dense, mist-covered forests of Washington's Olympic National Park were unlike anything he had ever experienced. He had come here to escape from the buzzing chaos of the city, from the pressures of his failed tech career, from the life that had once seemed so full of promise. He had left it all behind, driven by the idea of peace and solitude. He was a park ranger now, responsible for the vast, untouched wilderness that stretched endlessly before him. The transition hadn't been easy. It was an odd thing, moving from a cramped apartment in the city to a small, isolated cabin deep in the woods. The silence here was deafening. At night, the only sounds were the distant howls of wolves and the rustling of leaves in the wind. During the day, the quiet was thick, almost as if the forest was holding its breath, watching him. But Sam loved it, or at least, he tried to convince himself he did. He stood on the porch of his cabin, looking out over the expanse of trees. They stretched in every direction, so thick that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. It was beautiful, almost magical in its stillness, but there was something about it that made Sam uneasy, something he couldn't quite place. He shook off the thought. It was just nerves. He had moved here to restart, to escape the chaos, to find some peace of mind. This place was perfect for that. The park had been his dream job. Fresh air, no more deadlines, no more stressful meetings. But something felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this park than just its beauty. As a newcomer, Sam had to familiarize himself with the various trails and campsites, so he spent his first week doing routine patrols. Most of the visitors he encountered were harmless families looking to enjoy nature, adventurers tackling the more difficult hikes, people like him who sought refuge from the outside world. But today, as Sam set out to check on the Moon Falls Trail, a particularly remote route, he couldn't shake the odd sensation that something was out of place. The weather had been unusually thick with fog lately, and the air felt heavier than usual. The trees themselves seemed to bend and twist in ways that almost looked deliberate, unnatural. Shaking off his unease, Sam checked his gear radio flashlight. First aid kit hand, set off on foot, following the narrow path that led deeper into the wilderness. The air was damp with moisture, the ground soft beneath his boots. He moved cautiously, enjoying the solitude, but that nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. It was quiet out here, too quiet. No birds, no small animals skittering through the underbrush. The occasional rustling of wind through the leaves was the only sound. He glanced at his watch mid-afternoon, but it felt like the light was fading faster than it should have. The fog was thick now, curling in around the trees like a living thing, shrouding the forest in a mysterious, unsettling veil. He had heard the stories about the Moon Falls Trail, stories whispered by locals who claimed it had an eerie history. There were rumors about hikers who had gone missing in the area, people who had strayed too far off the path and never returned. But Sam wasn't one to buy into superstition. He had always believed in the practical explanation. People got lost, and there were predators out here, sure, but nothing beyond that. Still, as he walked further, the trail grew harder to follow. The markers seemed to disappear into the thick mist, and the trees grew denser. He had passed a few campsites along the way, but they were abandoned, and the fire pits were cold. It was strange. For a popular trail, there wasn't a soul in sight. Then he saw it half hidden by a thick cluster of trees, an abandoned tent. His heart skipped a beat. It was old, worn, and there was no sign of the camper. The entrance flap hung open, and the air around it smelled stagnant, as if it had been sitting there for days. Sam's gut instinct kicked in. There was something wrong here. He approached cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of the owner. A backpack was carelessly tossed to the side, its contents spilling out onto the forest floor. A pair of boots lay nearby, abandoned in the dirt. His eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening. This wasn't just a campsite left in a hurry. It looked as though the person had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. As he crouched to inspect the area, a flash of something caught his eye, something glinting beneath the pile of clothes near the tent. Sam reached down and pulled out a smartphone. It was cracked, but it still seemed functional. He clicked it on, the screen flickering to life. What he saw made his stomach turn. The most recent photos were not of the surrounding scenery, not even of the hiker's travels. They were disturbing, blurry images of something large and dark moving in the woods, taken from the edge of the trees. Shapes, figures, shadows. It was hard to tell, but one thing was unmistakable: the unease in the eyes of the person holding the camera. Something had been stalking them. He dropped the phone back into the dirt, his mind racing. This was bad, very bad. There was no simple explanation for this. He had seen enough missing person cases, had heard enough rumors to know what was happening here. Someone was out there in the forest, and they were not alone. The fog thickened, swirling around him like it was trying to swallow him whole. Sam's breath came out in ragged gasps as his mind raced. He reached for his radio, but the static was deafening. "Control, come in," he called into the radio. No response. The signal was dead, and in the silence that followed, something moved in the trees. The wind picked up as Sam stood in front of the abandoned campsite, the rustling of leaves amplifying the growing sense of unease that gnawed at him. Every crack of a twig, every shift in the air felt like a signal something was watching him. Something was out there. He scanned the campsite once more, noting the scattered belongings, the abandoned backpack, the misplaced boots, and the untouched fire pit. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, and the thought sent a chill down his spine. The smartphone, cracked and abandoned, was a chilling clue. The photos on it had been taken in a rush, possibly in a desperate attempt to capture something. Sam could almost feel the panic that must have been setting in as the person behind the lens realized they weren't alone. The blurry, haunting shapes in the photos suggested something massive moving through the trees, something that didn't belong. The unmistakable feeling of being hunted seeped into his bones. With a deep breath, he straightened and made his decision. He wasn't going to leave until he knew what had happened to the camper. Someone was missing, and it was his job to figure out why. Sam grabbed the radio again, his fingers trembling as he tried to get a signal. The static continued to hiss back at him, mocking his attempts to reach anyone for help. His usual confidence was faltering. This was more than just an abandoned campsite. Something was deeply wrong here. He shoved the radio back into his pack, grabbed a flashlight, and set off down the trail. The trees seemed to loom taller as he moved deeper into the forest, their dark silhouettes pressing in from all sides. The path was narrow, winding, and overgrown. As he walked, the mist began to close in, shrouding everything in a thick, damp fog. It felt like the very forest was trying to swallow him whole. Despite his growing anxiety, Sam pressed on. He had been through these woods many times before, but the sense of wrongness gnawed at him now, in a way it never had before. The lack of wildlife, the absence of the usual forest sounds, no birds, no rustling leaves, made him hyper-aware of every step he took. It was too quiet, too still. The trail narrowed, and Sam noticed how the trees seemed to crowd in on him, the branches arching over the path as if trying to trap him. He stopped for a moment, pulling out his map and trying to orient himself. The Moonfalls trail wasn't far ahead, but he had to be careful. Something had happened here, and if he didn't find out what it was soon, he might become the next person to vanish in this forgotten part of the park. As he walked, the air grew heavier. It wasn't just the mist, was the oppressive weight of the forest around him. The trees seemed to press closer, their limbs bending unnaturally. His flashlight flickered briefly, and he cursed under his breath, giving it a shake. The dim beam swept across the trail ahead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Then, he heard it. A low crackle, a snap from somewhere deeper in the woods, just beyond the reach of his flashlight. Sam froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he kept at his side. His heart began to race as the echo of that noise lingered in the air. The forest was alive, but not in the usual way. This was different. The sound had been too sharp, too intentional. Something was out there. The fog seemed to move with a life of its own, swirling around his legs as if it were a living entity. And for a moment, Sam felt as though the forest itself was closing in on him, pushing him deeper into its depths. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight, his thumb brushing the cold steel of the knife's handle. He needed to stay focused. The noise could have been an animal. It could have been the wind. But deep down, Sam felt the unmistakable prickling of fear creeping up his spine. It was that same sensation he had felt in the city right before everything fell apart. That feeling that something was watching, something waiting. He moved forward again, every step feeling heavier than the last. The thumping of his heart echoed in his ears. The fog was so thick now that it felt like it was closing in around him, the world growing darker with each passing moment. Snap. There it was again. Closer this time. His mind raced. His instincts screamed at him to turn around and leave, to run back to the cabin and radio for help. But something kept him moving forward. Was it duty? Curiosity? Or was it something darker? Something that had already set its hooks into him. Another step forward, then another. The trail ended at a clearing, the trees parting to reveal a small stream that ran down toward Moonfalls. The fog hung thick over the water, swirling in the air like ghosts. The sound of running water filled his ears, but there was something else. A strange, unnatural noise, a rhythmic thud, like something large was moving through the woods nearby. He was close now. The clearing was empty, save for the mist and the stream, but the silence that surrounded him felt wrong. Sam's instincts told him that he was no longer alone. The forest had shifted around him, and now it felt as though he was being drawn into something much larger than himself. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the air grew colder and the pressure of the silence weighed down on him. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist. Sam's heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat. It was a person, but not quite. Their body was hunched, as though the limbs had been twisted unnaturally, stretched out of proportion. The face was obscured by a hood, but the outline of the figure, tall, with limbs that seemed far too long, was unmistakable. It stood motionless, like a shadow cast by something that didn't belong. Sam couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The figure took a step forward, and then another, its footfall echoing across the clearing like the slow ticking of a clock. "Who's there?" Sam called, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. It took another step, and then the figure vanished into the mist as quickly as it had appeared. Sam's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process what he had just seen. The figure hadn't been human. It couldn't have been. Its movements were too unnatural, too smooth, like it had slipped in and out of the world without leaving a trace. With his heart hammering in his chest, Sam turned and ran, his feet carrying him back to the trail as fast as he could, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The fog seemed to follow him, closing in faster than ever, as if the forest itself was trying to keep him from escaping. His mind raced with questions, with dread. What was out there, and what had it wanted? But Sam already knew one thing, whatever it was, it wasn't finished with him yet. Sam's breath came in heavy bursts as he bolted down the trail, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step felt like an eternity, the sound of his feet crashing against the damp ground, barely reaching his ears as the eerie silence of the forest pressed in around him. The figure of the creature had vanished into the mist, but the sight of it had shaken him to his core. It hadn't been a trick of the light, nor had it been his imagination. It was real. Something was out there in these woods, something that shouldn't be. He couldn't shake the image of its long, twisted limbs, and the way it moved in naturally, like it wasn't entirely part of this world. And worse, it had been watching him, waiting. The forest itself felt alive, as if it were conspiring with whatever was out there to keep him trapped. The trail seemed to stretch on endlessly, but Sam pushed forward, desperate to return to the safety of the cabin. He had to get back to the station, to call in help, to warn someone, but with every step he took, the feeling of being followed intensified, creeping at the edges of his senses. His head snapped around, eyes darting through the thickening mist. But there was nothing there, only the trees, their dark forms looming over him like sentinels. The feeling of being watched never stopped, though, as if something unseen was moving with him, just out of sight. He reached the edge of the clearing where the Moon Falls trail began, panting heavily. The mist had thickened even more, wrapping the forest in an almost impenetrable shroud. The sunlight, already fading in the late afternoon, barely pierced through the fog. It felt like twilight, even though it was still hours before the sun should have set. Suddenly, something caught his aja movement, brief and subtle, just past the edge of the clearing. He froze, his pulse quickening again. The shape was small, but it was unmistakable. A figure, half hidden by the trees. "Hey," Sam called, trying to force his voice to sound steady, but it cracked on the last syllable. He took a step forward, squinting into the mist, hoping for a human form, a hiker perhaps, who had wandered off the trail. "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it turned and darted deeper into the trees, disappearing into the fog like a wisp of smoke. Sam's heart skipped a beat. Was it another camper? Or was it the thing he had seen before? Instinctively, Sam reached for his flashlight and turned it on. Its beam slicing through the heavy fog, but it felt useless, swallowed by the thick, swirling mist. He had to follow. It was his duty. He couldn't just leave someone out here, especially in the state the forest was in, with the eerie, unnatural, quiet pressing down on everything. He pushed forward, his footsteps quick and shallow, as he moved deeper into the trees. The fog curled around him, almost suffocating in its thickness. Each step he took seemed to make the forest feel smaller, tighter, as though the trees were closing in on him, trying to keep him from escaping. He rounded a large oak, his flashlight sweeping across the ground, and then froze. A campfire. It was dim, barely a flicker, but unmistakable. The smoke hung in the air like an ominous cloud, and the remnants of a campsite were scattered around it. Old cans of food, a sleeping bag, and an abandoned tent. It was exactly like the campsite he had found earlier, abandoned in a hurry, but this one felt more recent. The smell of burnt wood and something else, something foul hung in the air. Sam's throat tightened, and his hand instinctively reached for the radio on his belt. He tried to speak, but his voice was a whisper, barely escaping his lips. "Control, come in. This is Ranger Jenkins. Do you copy?" The radio hissed in response, but there was no answer. The static was louder than his voice, the sound unnerving and final. The signal was gone. He stepped closer to the fire pit, his eyes scanning the area. There were more signs of struggle now. Footprints in the dirt, a few pieces of torn fabric, and, just off to the side, a blood-stained jacket hanging from a branch. His stomach churned. This wasn't a simple case of campers wandering off. Something had happened here, something that had forced the campers to flee in terror, or worse, had taken them. He crouched next to the fire pit, his hands trembling as he sifted through the remnants of burned papers. A name caught his eye. Lena Harris. The name was scribbled on a piece of charred paper, half burned, but still legible. Sam's stomach dropped. Lena Harris. He remembered the name from the missing persons report he'd read when he first took this job. She had been reported missing 2 weeks ago, a hiker who had gone off the grid. But this wasn't just a hiker's misstep. This wasn't just a case of someone getting lost in the woods. This was something far darker. As Sam continued to look around, the forest around him seemed to grow colder, darker. The air felt like it was closing in on him, and the overwhelming silence of the trees was suffocating. He stood up quickly, his heart racing again, his eyes darting around. Something had been here recently, something that was still here, waiting. Then, from behind him, there was a noise. A low, almost inaudible, rustling sound. The kind of sound that sent a chill crawling down his spine. Sam spun around, his flashlight swinging wildly as he tried to pierce the thick fog. There was nothing. But then, as his flashlight settled, he saw it. A shape, a shadow, moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing. It wasn't human. It was too large, too twisted. It was there, just outside the reach of the light. And then, in an instant, it was gone. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he stared into the blackness where the figure had been. His mind raced, his body frozen with fear. What had he just seen? Was it the thing he had been running from? Was it another person? Another lost soul out here? His hand tightened around the flashlight as he slowly turned to leave the clearing. But his legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone, as though something was holding him in place. And that was when he heard it. A low, guttural growl, followed by a distorted whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You're not alone." The growl reverberated through the air, sending a chill down Sam's spine. It wasn't an animal's growl. This was something far worse. A low, resonant sound that seemed to come from the very earth beneath him, vibrating through his chest and into his bones. He stood still, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his eyes scanning the clearing around him. The flashlight shook in his hands as he desperately tried to pierce the heavy fog, but the beam barely reached more than a few feet. The growl came again, closer this time. It wasn't a sound from the trees. It was something directly ahead of him, hidden just beyond the reach of his light. Sam's body froze. He could feel the presence, the weight of something large, something ancient, moving just outside of sight. "No," he thought, "don't panic. It's just an animal, maybe a bear or something." But deep down, Sam knew it wasn't. There was no mistaking the feeling in his gut, the primal sense that something was out there, watching him, stalking him, and it wasn't anything he had ever encountered before. The rustling in the underbrush grew louder. The air around him seemed to grow colder, heavier, and the shadows from the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally long. He took a step back, his foot crunching on the forest floor, the sound sharp in the eerie silence that had settled over everything. The growl came again, followed by a low hiss. It was closer now, too close. Then, through the fog, a shape moved. At first, it was just a shadow, too quick to be clear, a blur of movement in the corner of his vision. Sam swung the flashlight in the direction of the sound, his pulse racing as he forced himself to focus. The beam of light hit something, and for a moment, Sam thought his heart might stop. A pair of eyes. They were glowing sickly yellow, reflecting the flashlight's beam like twin lanterns. The eyes were far too large, too wide, too unnatural. Sam couldn't see the rest of the creature, just the eyes, staring at him from the darkness, unblinking, unfeeling. A shiver ran down his spine, and his throat tightened, as though the very air around him had become thick with dread. The creature, whatever it was, didn't move. It just watched him, the growl rising and falling in the air like a low warning. Sam felt a surge of fear rip through him, cold and sharp, threatening to paralyze him. Get a grip, he thought, willing his legs to move. He couldn't let it see him freeze. He couldn't stay here. Without taking his eyes off the glowing orbs, Sam slowly reached for his radio, fingers trembling as he fumbled with it. The signal was still dead, the static loud and deafening. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out everything except the rhythmic growl that now seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath him. The creature let out a low hiss, like air escaping from a balloon, its yellow eyes narrowing as it took a slow step forward. Oh God, Sam thought, his breath coming in short bursts. It's coming closer. He spun on his heel and bolted toward the trail, adrenaline pumping through his veins as his feet pounded the ground. His body moved before he could even think about it. He didn't look back. He couldn't look back. The sound of the creature's heavy footsteps followed him, not rushing, but deliberate, measured, as if it were enjoying the hunt. The mist was thicker now, the trees closing in as he pushed through the underbrush. Branches whipped against his face, but he didn't stop. His pulse was a steady roar in his ears as he ran, his breath sharp and ragged. The trail stretched out ahead of him, but the fog made it seem endless, the path disappearing into the eerie white haze. Behind him, the growl continued, echoing through the trees like a predator, savoring the chase. Sam's chest tightened, the weight of fear sinking deep into his bones. He pushed forward, but no matter how fast he ran, no matter how hard he tried to break free, it was as though the forest itself was pushing him back, trapping him. And then, as if the world itself was mocking him, Sam tripped. He fell to the ground, his hands scraping against the forest floor, the flashlight flying from his grip and landing in the dirt, its beam now pointing skyward. The creature was close. Sam scrambled to his feet, but his body felt heavy, sluggish, as though the very air around him was thickening, pressing down on him, trying to hold him still. He glanced over his shoulder, panic surging through him as the shadows seemed to move, slithering closer with every passing second. The creature's eyes gleamed through the fog. It was close now, closer than it had ever been. But just as it seemed to be closing in on him, Sam saw the silhouette of something ahead of him. A building. A structure. The ranger station. His heart skipped a beat as he pushed himself harder, faster, forcing his legs to move despite the overwhelming exhaustion that gripped him. He could make it. He just had to make it to the station. The growl behind him intensified, the sound vibrating through his chest, but Sam didn't stop. He didn't look back. The station was just ahead, its outline barely visible through the thick fog. He could hear the faint hum of the generator, the soft glow of lights that told him he wasn't alone, that there was still a chance to escape. The station door was within reach when the ground beneath him cracked. Sam's foot slipped, and for a moment, he thought he was falling, his body twisting in midair. His hand caught the doorframe just in time, his fingers grasping at the wood, pulling himself up, his body shaking with terror and exhaustion. And then, just as he pulled himself inside, he heard the thing's voice. "You can't hide." The door slammed shut behind him. Sam stumbled into the station, gasping for breath, his body shaking with the cold that had settled into his bones. His mind raced, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, but his legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. He turned to lock the door, his hands fumbling for the bolt. The growl outside continued, but now it was distant, fading into the mist. The thing had stopped chasing him. It was waiting. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. But one thing was certain: whatever it was out there, whatever he had seen, was still watching him, still waiting for the right moment to strike. And Sam knew, with sickening clarity, that it wasn't done with him yet. Sam's hands shook as he locked the door, his fingers clumsy from adrenaline, fumbling with the bolt as he tried to secure the entrance. His heart still pounded in his chest, the heavy thudding echoing in his ears. But the silence of the ranger station felt like a trap. The hum of the generator was a low, constant reminder that he was still here, still alive, but the feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach refused to leave. He backed away from the door, eyes darting to every corner of the room. as though expecting anything to burst through. The windows were still, the fog outside pressing against the glass, but beyond that, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. It was as though the entire forest had held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Sam's breathing slowed, but it was ragged, uneven. He stood there, leaning against the wall, trying to gather his thoughts. He wiped his face, realizing just how cold his skin had become, his body still trembling from the terror he had felt outside. He had escaped. He had made it into the station, but that didn't mean he was safe. It didn't mean anything was over. The creature wasn't done with him. He could feel it in his bones. He turned toward the small desk at the far side of the room, where the radio sat, but when he picked it up, the static was deafening. There was no signal, no voice that could help him. The feeling of isolation, of being completely alone, hit him like a punch to the gut. He had to rely on himself, and that terrified him more than anything. "Get a grip, Sam," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He took a few deep breaths, trying to calm himself, to focus. The events of the past hour felt like a blur, his frantic search for the camper's trail, the strange figure in the trees, and the terrifying realization that something was stalking him in the forest. The creature, whatever it wasn't a normal animal. It wasn't just a bear or a wolf. Sam had seen things, been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. The way the creature moved, the eerie glow of its eyes, and the unnatural way it slithered between the trees told him that whatever it was not of this world. He took another look out the window, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the thick fog that surrounded the station. His thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of everything, but no matter how he turned it over in his mind, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was caught in a web, caught in something far older than himself, something that had been waiting for him, waiting for all of them. He stepped back from the window, feeling the cold creep into his bones. As he turned toward the radio again, his attention was drawn to the small bookshelf in the corner of the station, a few books scattered on the shelf. One in particular caught his eye, Legends of the Pacific Northwest. Sam had seen it before, during his initial setup in the station. He had dismissed it as just a guidebook, something filled with local myths and ghost stories. But now, the title seemed to mock him. He pulled the book from the shelf, flipping through the pages until he found the section on local legends. His fingers stopped on a page about creatures that haunted the forests of the Pacific. Northwest beasts that were said to stalk the trees, creatures that preyed on the unwary. He read the words, but the more he read, the more the pit in his stomach deepened. The descriptions were familiar, too familiar. One creature stood out, the shrouded one, a thing said to haunt the deep forests of the Olympic Peninsula. A creature with hollow, glowing eyes, its body a twisted mockery of human form. The legend spoke of its hunger for the living, of how it stalked the woods, waiting for the unwary to wander too close. The hairs on Sam's neck stood up as he read the chilling description. It couldn't be. There was no way. The shrouded one was just a myth, an old story meant to scare people away from the deeper parts of the forest. But the way it matched the creature, he had seen its glowing eyes. Its distorted form made his blood run cold. This thing had been waiting for him. He closed the book with a snap, suddenly feeling the weight of its words settle into his chest. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a prison, and the creature wasn't just hunting, it was guarding. Sam's mind raced again. He had to act. He couldn't sit here, waiting to be caught. The creature would find him eventually. That much was certain. But if he could get to the old Ranger lookout tower nearby, he could get a better vantage point, maybe signal for help. Or at least see if there were other campers still out there, still alive. But the forest, the darkness had a way of pulling people in, and every instinct he had screamed at him to stay inside, to lock the door and wait for daylight. But Sam wasn't the type to hide. Not anymore. He grabbed his jacket and the flashlight, determined to reach the lookout tower before the creature could find him. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, his nerves buzzing with the tension of the forest outside, but he knew it was now or never. There was no going back. With one final glance at the station's door, Sam took a deep breath and stepped back outside. The fog was even thicker now, closing in around him like a living thing. Every step he took felt heavier, as if the forest itself was trying to pull him down. He moved quickly, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the mist, his eyes scanning every movement in the trees, every whisper of wind, every snap of a twig. It was too quiet. The forest felt like a living thing, watching him, waiting for the moment when it would pounce. And in the distance, he heard the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving through the trees. The creature was still following him, but Sam wasn't running anymore. He was hunting back. Sam's feet pounded against the wet ground as he made his way deeper into the forest, the fog pressing in on him like a thick veil. The familiar path of the trail had long since disappeared, swallowed by the creeping mist. His flashlight flickered in his hand, its beam barely cutting through the dense fog, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. He wasn't sure how much time had passed since he'd left the ranger station. His thoughts were scattered, racing ahead of him. The creature was out there, somewhere. He could feel its presence in the air, its malevolent energy hanging like a storm cloud just beyond the trees. The growls had stopped, but the stillness only made it worse. It was waiting. The weight of the forest pressed down on him. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their twisted branches reaching into the mist, their shadows stretching unnaturally long. It felt like he was walking through a dream, disjointed, uncertain, and full of a deep, foreboding sense of dread. His heart raced, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cold. He knew he couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. He had to find the tower. He had to get a vantage point. If he could see the forest from above, maybe he could figure out where the creature was, or at least get a better idea of what he was up against. But every step felt like a mistake, the fog closing in tighter, the sound of his breath louder, his heartbeat a constant drum in his ears. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and damp earth. And beneath that, something else. Something metallic. Blood. Sam's stomach lurched as the realization hit him. He stopped it in his tracks, his flashlight shaking in his grip. He turned slowly, scanning the ground, his breath coming faster now. His light flickered, then settled on the ground ahead of him. Footprints. Large, deep imprints, as if someone had been dragged through the forest. But the tracks weren't from any animal. The ground was stained with blood, the dark red splattered across the wet earth, leading deeper into the forest, into the darkness. Sam's body went cold. His mind screamed at him to turn back, to go back to the station, to find safety. But the images in his mind, the faces of those who had gone missing, the frantic photos on the abandoned phone, kept him moving. He wasn't going to let whatever it was have them. Not if he could help it. He followed the trail, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the growing darkness. The blood splattered more frequently, the tracks more jagged, as if something large had been dragged and forced through the forest. He could feel his pulse pounding in his throat, his body instinctively tensing with each step. Then, as he reached a clearing, his flashlight flickered again, then died. Sam cursed under his breath, his heart racing. He fumbled with the flashlight, shaking it in his hand, but it refused to turn back on. The forest was now completely silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, no sounds at all. Then, from the darkness in front of him, a figure stepped into the clearing. Sam's breath caught in his throat. It was a man, or something that had once been a man. His clothes were torn, covered in blood, his eyes wide and vacant, staring straight ahead. The body was thin, too thin, gaunt, as though he hadn't eaten in weeks. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his mouth hung open, as though he had been screaming, though no sound came from him now. His movements were jerky, like he was being controlled by something else. Sam's feet were frozen to the ground, his mind screaming at him to move, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The figure stumbled forward, its hands reaching out, its fingers long and bent at odd angles, as if they had been twisted into unnatural positions. The stench of decay and rot filled the air. Sam's stomach churned, but he couldn't look away. The figure was walking, dragging its limbs behind it, like a puppet with its strings cut, its vacant eyes fixed on Sam with an unblinking intensity. And then it stopped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Sam's heart hammered in his chest as the man, or what was left of him, opened his mouth, revealing a set of broken, yellowed teeth. The thing staggered forward, moving closer, and then, from its throat, a whisper, "Leave this place." The voice was faint, raspy, as if it had been worn down by time or by some terrible force, but it was unmistakable. It was a warning, a desperate plea. Before Sam could react, the figure lurched toward him with an unnatural speed. His instincts kicked in, and he leaped backward, his hand grasping for the knife at his belt. He pulled it free, just as the creature's hand shot out, grabbing him by the wrist, its cold, clammy fingers digging into his skin. The creature's eyes locked onto his, its mouth opening wide, the decaying skin stretching with the movement. Sam shoved the knife into its chest with a violent jerk, but the figure didn't flinch. It didn't even seem to feel it. With a sickening crack, the thing twisted its head unnaturally, like the sound of bones snapping under pressure, and Sam felt a sharp pain shoot through his arm. The figure was pulling him in, its grip tightening. He gasped in pain, panic surging through him as he reached for the knife again. But before he could push it deeper into the creature's flesh, a flash of light cut through the darkness. The creature screeched a high-pitched wail that seemed to shake the very trees and released its grip. Sam stumbled backward, the knife falling from his hand as the creature jerked violently, as if something had pulled it away. It was gone in an instant, vanishing back into the darkness, leaving Sam standing in the clearing, breathing heavily, his body trembling. He wasn't alone anymore, but he didn't feel safe. He looked up, his eyes searching through the fog, and there, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the shadow of something else, something taller, something that moved in the mist with a quiet, deliberate grace. And for the first time, Sam knew he wasn't just being hunted, he was being watched. The air in the clearing was thick with tension, like a storm was about to break. Sam's heart still pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay calm. He glanced around quickly, his instincts screaming at him to keep moving, to escape this place, but his legs felt like lead, his body frozen with the sight of what had just happened. The creature, the thing, had let go of him, but its eerie whisper lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder that he was still far from safe. His gaze darted back to the edge of the clearing, where the shadow of the taller figure remained, silent and still, watching him with an almost predatory patience. Sam's blood ran cold as he realized it hadn't moved since he'd noticed it, but its presence was as undeniable as the dense fog surrounding them. The trees groaned in the distance, an unnatural creak that made Sam's spine tighten. It was the same low, haunted sound that he had heard before, the one that felt like the forest itself was alive and aware of his presence, waiting for him to make a mistake. The tall figure in the fog didn't move. It just stood there, hidden in the mist, like an ancient predator, waiting for Sam to come closer. Sam slowly backed away, his eyes locked on the figure, knowing that he couldn't turn his back on it. He reached down for the flashlight that had fallen earlier and flicked it back on, the beam slicing through the fog like a knife. It was dim, flickering weakly, but it was enough to momentarily illuminate the shadows. Nothing. It had disappeared. The fog thickened, more oppressive than before, pressing in around him like it was alive. Sam swallowed, forcing down the wave of nausea rising in his throat. He didn't know what that thing was, what it had wanted, or why it had let him go. But he knew one thing for sure: it wasn't the only thing out here. There was something else in the forest, something much bigger, much older. He had to move. With his heart racing, Sam spun around and began to run, his boots hitting the ground in frantic thuds as he pushed himself harder, further away from the clearing. The trees blurred past him, their twisted branches creaking in the wind, as the darkness closed in tighter, as if the forest itself were trying to stop him. The creature was still out there. He could feel it, a heavy, malignant presence that lurked just beyond his vision, in the thick of the fog, watching. He couldn't let it catch him again. He couldn't let it get closer. He stumbled forward, his flashlight flickering with each step, casting brief flashes of light that seemed to illuminate the shadows in strange, impossible ways. The trees, the underbrush, they all shifted as though they were alive, moving at the edges of his vision, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. The forest was closing in, and it felt like it was playing with him. Sam's breath came out in ragged gasps, but he pushed on, his muscles burning as the cold mist wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. He couldn't stop. The forest had swallowed him whole, and now he was part of it, like a fly caught in a spider's web. The trees seemed to press against him, their gnarled branches reaching out to snare him, and he realized that no matter how fast he ran, the darkness was always a few steps ahead. The mist was so thick now that he could barely see more than a few feet ahead of him. His mind screamed at him to turn back, to go to the ranger station, to call for backup. But the thought of going back into the fog, back toward that clearing, filled him with a deep, suffocating dread. What if it's waiting for me? The thought slammed into him, and before he could stop himself, he spun around, his flashlight cutting through the fog. Looking behind him, he saw nothing. The trees were empty. The figure, the creature was gone, or at least, it wasn't in his immediate line of sight, but the air felt different, thicker. He could feel it in his skin, the weight of something pressing down on him. And then, in the distance, just beyond the trees, he heard it, a slow, methodical thump. He froze. The sound wasn't coming from the direction he had just come from. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the woods, from somewhere ahead of him. Another thump. This time, it was closer. Sam's breath caught in his throat. He started moving again, faster this time, driven by pure instinct. But the thumping followed. It was getting louder, each beat reverberating through the forest like the pulse of some ancient creature beneath the earth. The ground itself seemed to hum with the sound, vibrating beneath his feet. What the hell is that? He wasn't sure if he was imagining it, or if it was real, but every instinct he had screamed at him to run, to get away. But where could he go? The forest had become a labyrinth, the trees closing in on all sides. Thump, and then it came, the unmistakable sound of someone dragging itself across the ground. Sam's legs shook beneath him, his thoughts scrambling for some sort of explanation. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the terror around him. He wasn't alone anymore. Whatever had been stalking him before had found him again, and this time it wasn't content to stay in the shadows. A shape moved through the trees, large and distorted, its limbs bent in unnatural angles. The mist seemed to part just enough to reveal it a figure towering over Sam, its face a twisted, hollow mask, its eyes gleaming yellow and hungry. And then, in the heart of the mist, he saw them. More figures. More of them, emerging from the shadows like the ghosts of the forest. Their eyes gleamed with the same yellow light, their forms bent and broken, distorted in ways that made Sam's stomach churn. There were more, so many more. The thing in front of him growled, a low, guttural sound that sent a shockwave through the air. The figures in the trees moved closer, their limbs contorted in impossible ways, as though they were being dragged by an invisible force. Sam could feel the cold press of terror freezing his limbs, making it hard to breathe. The creatures were all around him now, closing in, the darkness growing heavier, suffocating him. He backed away, his legs trembling beneath him, but he couldn't stop them. They were coming. Run! A voice screamed in his mind, but there was nowhere to run. Sam's breath came in ragged gasps as the figures closed in around him, their twisted forms creeping forward, each step slower than the last, but undeniably purposeful. The forest had transformed into a labyrinth of fear, with every tree, every shadow, becoming part of the creature's web. The growls of the figures were distant at first, but as they moved closer, the sound grew louder, more insistent. Sam could hear their bones crack and groan, the sound of twisted limbs stretching unnaturally. There was no escape. He spun in place, heart pounding, looking for an opening, for a way to break through the growing circle of darkness. But every path, every turn, seemed to lead him deeper into the heart of the fog, into the reach of these twisted beings. He had been a park ranger for years, trained to handle all sorts of wildlife and emergencies. But this was beyond anything he had ever encountered. These weren't animals, and they certainly weren't people. They were things in natural horrors, born of the very forest itself, feeding off the fear that now seeped into his bones. "Get a hold of yourself," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling with fear. His hand instinctively reached for his radio, but of course, the signal was still dead, the static mocking his attempts to call for help. Think. He forced himself to take a step back, his eyes scanning the area for anything that could help him. The forest was eerily quiet now, the distant growls fading into an ominous silence that pressed against his eardrums like the weight of the earth itself. The mist closed in, and the shadows shifted around him, blurring into indistinct shapes that felt alive. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over a root. His pulse quickened, panic threatening to take over, but he kept moving, each step driven by sheer survival. But there was nowhere to go. The creatures were surrounding him now, their yellow eyes gleaming in the dark like twin lanterns in the fog. They weren't running, they weren't charging at him like animals did. They were studying him, circling, waiting for the right moment. Sam's mind raced. He had to make a choice. The creatures, whatever they weren't, going to leave him alone. They had been stalking him since he stepped foot on the Moonfalls Trail, and now they were closing in, slowly suffocating him in their grip. A cold chill crept up his spine as he realized something: he wasn't just being hunted, he was being herded. The trees were closing in, the path disappearing under the weight of the fog and the oppressive presence of the creatures. They had been leading him here, pushing him toward the heart of the forest, toward whatever it was that controlled them. And then, as if his thoughts had summoned it, something moved in the distance, a flicker, a shadow, a shape that seemed to shift in and out of view. Sam's breath hitched as his flashlight flickered in his grip, the weak beam catching a glimpse of something huge, a shape, tall and unnatural, standing just beyond the reach of his light. It wasn't like the others. It was bigger, more massive, its presence overpowering everything around it. Sam's legs froze as his mind tried to process what he was seeing, but it was impossible. The figure was human-like, its features obscured in shadow, but its size was like nothing Sam had ever seen. And then, the creature spoke. The voice was low and raspy, its words distorting the air around him, making the very ground beneath his feet feel unstable. "You've come too far." Sam's heart stopped. The voice wasn't just spoken. It rattled the earth, vibrating deep within him, as if the forest itself was alive with the sound. The air thickened, and the mist seemed to part for a moment, revealing the figure fully. It stepped forward. The light from Sam's flashlight caught its eyes yellow, like the others, but burning with an unnatural intensity. The eyes seemed to see him, to pierce through him, searching, digging into his very soul. Sam's breath caught in his throat, his body frozen in place, every muscle screaming at him to run, but he couldn't. The creature's form was twisted, its limbs long and disproportionate, stretching unnaturally in the shadows. The ground beneath its feet seemed to warp, like it was bending to its will. It wasn't like the creatures that had been following him. This one was the leader, the one in control, the one who had been waiting. Sam tried to move, tried to break free from the grip of the terror that held him, but his legs felt like stone. His flashlight flickered again, and for a moment, he thought he saw something else, another shape, another figure, this time larger, more formless, crawling just beneath the creature. The forest around him seemed to pulse with the same rhythm, as if it was breathing with the entity, moving in time with its every step. "You are not meant to be here," the creature said, its voice now a heavy rasp. "You belong to the forest." Before Sam could react, before he could even move, the creature lunged. Its arm shot out, extending far beyond what should have been possible, the long, gnarled fingers reaching for him, closing in with unnatural speed. Sam screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the fog, and then everything went dark. The darkness swallowed him whole. Sam's scream was cut off as the world around him seemed to twist and warp. His body pulled into the grip of something far stronger than he could ever hope to resist. His limbs felt heavy, his body numb, as if the very air around him had solidified, holding him in place. The creature's voice echoed in his mind, low and insistent, like a broken record. "You belong to the forest." Sam's heart raced as the shadows closed in tighter around him, the air thick and suffocating. He could feel the oppressive weight of the creature's presence wrapping around him, its breath hot against his skin, its fingers stretching unnaturally far as it dragged him toward it. His body screamed in protest, but his legs wouldn't move, his muscles locked in place by some invisible force. The world around him shifted, the trees bending and twisting, their branches clawing at the fog. Sam's eyes struggled to focus, his vision blurring as the creature drew him closer. He could see its glowing yellow eyes, burning through the mist. Its form now almost fully revealed a grotesque, twisted figure, towering over him like some ancient god, its limbs contorting in ways that made his stomach churn. The ground beneath him felt soft, like it was shifting, pulsating with the creature's every movement. It was as though the very forest had become a part of it, bending to its will, its power. Sam's body was still helpless, but his mind raced with thoughts of escape. "I can't let it take me. I can't let it win." But no matter how hard he fought, he couldn't break free. His muscles refused to obey, the terror rooting him to the spot as the creature's twisted hand closed around his wrist. "You cannot fight me, Sam Jenkins," the creature growled, its voice a terrible rasp. "The forest knows you. It has claimed you. There is no escape from the darkness now." The words struck him like a physical blow. Claimed. It had been waiting for him. The forest, the fog, the very earth, everything here had been alive with the thing's presence, feeding off his fear, drawing him closer with every step. The cabin, the trail, the strange disappearances, it had all been part of its design. A cold wave of despair washed over him as the creature's fingers curled tighter around his wrist, pulling him forward. He could feel his body moving with it now, a puppet on invisible strings. It was too much, too overwhelming. The power of the creature was suffocating, and as the shadows closed in, Sam felt something inside him snap. He felt it, deep in his chest, a connection, a bond formed between him and the darkness. It was as if the forest had opened up inside him, its roots burrowing into his veins, its whispers crawling through his thoughts. The hunger, the terror, the unyielding pressure of it wasn't just around him anymore. It was inside him, wrapping around his soul, pulling him closer to the void. Sam's eyes flickered, the fog around him thickening, as though it were swallowing the last remnants of his will. The creature's grip tightened, and he could hear its voice, low and cruel. "This is where you belong, where you will stay, forever." And then, for a brief moment, the world around him seemed too slow. The mist parted, just enough for him to see the dark, twisted landscape stretching before him. It wasn't the forest anymore. The trees, the shadows, they were gone. In their place was something far worse. A vast, endless chasm, filled with swirling blackness. An abyss that stretched to the horizon. It was like staring into the heart of the universe itself. Cold, infinite void that seemed to pull at him, beckoning him to step forward. His heart clenched in his chest as the creature pushed him forward. He could feel the force of its presence behind him, urging him closer to the edge of the abyss. But something stirred inside him. A flicker of light, a spark of resistance. "Fight," the voice whispered from within, but this time, it wasn't the creature's voice. It was his own. Sam's breath quickened, the sensation of being drawn into the void growing stronger. He couldn't let it take him. He wouldn't let it win. With a final, desperate push, Sam jerked his arm free from the creature's grasp. He stumbled forward, his body finally obeying him, even as the force of the darkness tried to pull him back. His feet moved against the pole, each step slower than the last, as if the very earth beneath him were fighting to hold him in place. The creature's growl rumbled behind him, a deep, guttural sound filled with rage. But Sam didn't stop. He couldn't. He pushed through the mist, fighting against the pressure that threatened to crush him. His body screamed in protest, his legs shaking, but he didn't care. There had to be a way out. There had to be something, anything, that could free him from this nightmare. The darkness can't have me. It can't. I'm not part of it. And then, just as he thought he couldn't go any further, a crack of light appeared ahead of him. It was small at first, but it grew, cutting through the fog like a beacon. It was the first real light he had seen in what felt like an eternity, and it pulled him forward, urging him towards safety. The fog started to recede as the light grew brighter, the pressure around him easing, the shadows retreating. The forest began to take shape again, its twisted limbs stretching into the sky as if fighting against the light. Sam pushed forward, his body aching with every step, but the light was closer now. He could feel the warmth of it, the safety of it, and as he stepped into the light, the world around him seemed to shift again. The forest was still there, but it was fading, losing its grip on him. The creature's growl echoed one last time, but it was distant now, like a fading echo in the distance. Sam collapsed to his knees, his hands trembling as he gasped for breath. The light wrapped around him like a protective barrier, but he knew that the darkness wasn't gone. It would always be there, waiting for him to let down his guard. He had survived for now. But the forest, the creature it, would never stop hunting him. Sam lay on the forest floor, breathing in deep, ragged gasps. The cold air filled his lungs, sharp and bitter, but it was a comfort compared to the suffocating pressure of the fog that had gripped him just moments before. His heart still thundered in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears as he tried to steady himself, to calm the frantic thoughts racing through his mind. He had escaped, for now, but the shadow of what he had just faced hung over him like a dark cloud, and it felt like the forest itself was breathing with him, waiting for the moment when it would come for him again. The light that had guided him out of the creature's grip was dimming now, retreating back into the thick fog, leaving him surrounded by shadows once more. The forest was still too still. The usual sounds of wind in the trees, the scurrying of small animals, had vanished. It was as if the entire world had gone silent, holding its breath. Sam pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his legs as the exhaustion of the chase began to catch up with him. His flashlight had gone out, its feeble beam now dark, and the dense fog around him made it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of him. The trees, which had once seemed so majestic and full of life, now looked like monstrous silhouettes, their gnarled branches twisting like hands reaching out to grab him. He wiped his face, his palms slick with sweat despite the cold. He had to keep moving, no matter what. The creature, the thing that had stalked him through the forest, that had twisted the very forest around him, was still out there. It hadn't given up. It would never stop hunting him. Sam turned, his eyes scanning the fog, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The silence was overwhelming. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it, all the figures, the creature. The way the forest had felt alive, almost as though it was feeding off him. But no. He knew what he had seen. It had been real. A distant noise broke through, the silence a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. Sam's stomach tightened, and his heart skipped a beat. The growl. It was back. The creature was close. He didn't wait to see what came next. He sprinted, pushing himself harder, faster, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he darted between the trees. The mist seemed to swirl around him, thickening with each step, as if the forest itself was trying to keep him trapped. But Sam refused to slow down. He couldn't afford to. If he stopped, he hesitated for even a moment, he would be consumed. The growl was louder now, closer, echoing off the trees. It was no longer just an animal's growl. It was something more, something ancient. It felt like the very ground beneath his feet was alive, shifting with every step he took, moving with him, pulling him further into the heart of the woods. This is it, Sam thought, his breath coming in ragged bursts. I have to get out of here. The thought was a fleeting hope, quickly dashed by the sound of heavy footfalls behind him. Something was running, something fast, something hungry. He glanced over his shoulder, barely seeing the shadow as it lunged toward him. It was large, too large, its limbs stretching out unnaturally, moving faster than it should have. He saw the glowing yellow eyes again, burning through the fog like twin lanterns. And the twisted mouth, too wide, too grotesque, parting to reveal rows of jagged teeth. Sam's heart stopped. It was coming. The creature was coming for him. In a flash of panic, he turned sharply, stumbling into the thick underbrush. He heard the creature's growl rise into a deafening roar as it charged after him, crashing through the trees. He could hear the snap of branches, the heavy thud of its footsteps, but he didn't dare look back. His legs burned, his body protesting every step, but he forced himself forward. His only thought was survival. He darted between the trees, weaving in and out of the thick foliage, desperate to lose the creature in the mist. But every time he thought he had gained some distance, the growl would pierce the fog again, closer than before, driving him forward. The creature wasn't just chasing him, it was hurting him, pushing him toward something. The ground beneath him shifted again, the earth beneath his feet giving way slightly. Sam's foot slipped on the slick surface, and he fell to his knees, his palms scraping against the ground. He cursed, pushing himself up quickly, but the moment of hesitation was enough. The creature was upon him. He didn't hear it, he felt it, the cold presence crashing down on him from behind. Its breath was hot against his neck, and before he could react, a clawed hand shot out, grabbing him by the shoulder and yanking him backward. He gasped, his vision blurring, his body lifted off the ground, the weight of the creature dragging him toward its gaping mouth. Its teeth clicked together, inches from his throat. But then, suddenly, the weight on his back shifted. The creature recoiled, letting out an agonized screech, as something massive crashed into it from the side. Sam hit the ground with a hard thud, gasping for air, his body aching from the impact. For a moment, everything was still. The fog hung thick around him, the only sound, the distant rustling of leaves and the labored breaths of the creature. Sam's eyes darted to the side, where another figure stood, large and imposing. It was human-shaped, but the edges of its body shimmered in the fog like a mirage, its form flickering in and out of view. Sam didn't understand. Was it another creature? Had he been saved? The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing a soft green, its movements slow and deliberate. It reached toward him, and Sam instinctively flinched. But instead of attacking, the figure knelt beside him, a low voice whispering just above a breath. "You are not meant to be here." Before Sam could process the words, the figure vanished back into the fog, leaving him alone in the clearing. He barely had time to register what had happened before he heard the thud of footsteps, slow, deliberate. The creature was still out there, its rage echoing through the mist. Sam scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. The figure had saved him for now, but the creature was still hunting, and he wasn't safe. Not yet. Sam's mind spun in a haze of confusion and fear. The creature was still out there, hunting him, but something had changed. That mysterious figure who had saved him, or at least intervened, had vanished without a trace, leaving him in the silence of the fog once more. Sam's pulse raced as he scanned the clearing, his flashlight weak in his trembling grip, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around him. What had just happened? Was the figure a part of the forest, like the creature? Or had it been something else, someone else just as lost in this nightmare as he was? His thoughts were interrupted by a low growl from the trees. Sam's blood ran cold. The sound was unmistakable, closer this time. It wasn't the same growl from before. This was different. The air seemed to thicken with the creature's presence, and Sam felt it. He wasn't alone. It was coming for him, circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His legs were weak, his body drained from the chase, but Sam forced himself to move. His survival instincts kicked in, and he staggered toward the edge of the clearing, praying that he would find a pathini path that would lead him to safety. He couldn't stay here, not with the growl echoing behind him, not with the fog closing in like a suffocating blanket. He pushed through the underbrush, his breath coming in shallow gasps, the cold dampness of the forest pressing against his skin. He moved quickly, but cautiously, his eyes darting to every movement in the shadows, every flicker of light in the corner of his vision. His heart thudded in his chest, the noise so loud that it drowned out everything else. The fog twisted around him, thick and heavy, as if trying to swallow him whole. Then, suddenly, he felt it, a presence. Not the creature, not the twisted shadow stalking him from behind. This was something different, something that wasn't part of the forest, wasn't part of the darkness. He could feel it, just beyond the mist, a shift in the air that wasn't the wind, wasn't the trees. He turned slowly, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end, as he tried to focus his eyes in the dim light. And there it was, a shadow, moving silently through the trees, emerging from the fog like a wisp of smoke. The figure was taller than any human should be, and it seemed to shimmer in and out of existence, its outline indistinct, like something from a dream. Sam's breath caught in his throat. Was it the same figure from earlier? Had it come back to help him? Or was it something worse? Something that would take advantage of his weakness, of his desperation, to lure him deeper into the forest's grip. Before he could react, the figure's voice came, low and calm, though it felt like it reverberated in his chest, filling the air around him. "You are not meant to be here." Sam stumbled back, his heart racing, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching him with those dark, unfathomable eyes. He couldn't tell if it was human or something else. The light from his flashlight flickered again, casting the figure's form in eerie relief before it vanished into the fog. Sam's breath came fast. What was happening? Who was this figure? And why was it watching him? The growl sounded again, louder this time. The creature wasn't far behind. He didn't have time to question it further. He had to get away. The figure may have intervened earlier, but it was unclear whether it had been trying to help him or simply wanted to watch him suffer. Sam turned and sprinted again, his body still heavy with exhaustion, his muscles burning with every step. The forest blurred around him, the fog swirling, the trees reaching out like hands trying to snare him. The growl was closer, now closer than ever. He could feel the ground beneath him tremble with each step the creature took. As he ran, Sam's mind raced, trying to think of something, anything that could help him escape. He had to make it to the ranger station. He had to get back to the cabin, but the path had become a maze, every turn leading him deeper into the forest, farther away from safety. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a faint glow, a flicker of light shining through the fog. It was the lookout tower. Sam's heart leaped in his chest. The tower was still a few miles away, but it was his only hope. If he could make it there, he could see the forest from above. He could see the creature's movements, its patterns, and maybe, just maybe, he could figure out a way to escape. But as he moved closer, something stopped him. A figure taller than any human emerged from the trees, blocking his path to the tower. It was the same figure from earlier, shimmering in and out of focus, its presence so overwhelming that Sam's breath caught in his throat. "You cannot leave," it whispered, its voice like an echo, like a memory. The figure moved closer, its long limbs stretching unnaturally. Sam's body froze, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet were planted firmly in place. The creature was closing in. And now, Sam had no choice but to face whatever this figure was. He couldn't escape. He couldn't run. The darkness was all around him now, and as the figure moved closer, its glowing eyes locking with his, Sam knew whatever he had come here for, whatever hope he had left, he was no longer in control. And the forest, the mist, the creatures, it was all pulling him deeper into its heart. Sam stood frozen, the figure before him towering, its long limbs stretching out in unnatural angles. The forest around him seemed to pulse with the figure's presence, the air heavy and thick with tension. His heart hammered in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to run, to fight, to escape. But his body was heavy with fear, his legs refusing to move as the creature, this impossible, otherworldly being, stepped closer. "You cannot leave," it whispered. The voice a hollow echo that seemed to seep into Sam's bones, sinking deep into his mind like an invasive thought. "You have crossed the threshold. Now, you are part of the forest." The words felt like a physical weight on his chest, pressing him down, making him feel small and insignificant in the face of something far older, far more powerful than anything he had ever encountered. Sam could feel the heat of its presence close to him, the air warping with every breath he took. The creature's form shimmered, its body flickering between shapes, distorting as though it didn't quite belong in this world. The forest around him seemed to respond, the trees groaning and shifting as though they were alive, as though they were part of the creature's will. The fog thickened, swirling in unnatural patterns, closing in on him. His surroundings began to feel unfamiliar, like the very landscape was changing, bending to the whims of the being before him. It wasn't just a creature, this was the forest itself, embodied, manifesting through the very land. Sam's mind raced. "I need to break free. I need to fight." But as the creature's gaze locked with his thoughts faltered. It felt like something had reached inside him, pulling at his deepest fears, his darkest thoughts. He could feel the creature's presence in his mind, sliding into the cracks, whispering secrets he didn't want to know. "I've seen you," Sam said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You've been watching me. This place. It's not just a forest, is it?" The figure didn't respond immediately. Its eyes, those glowing yellow orbs, flickered with what Sam could only describe as amusement, though it wasn't the type of amusement any human would recognize. It wasn't joy, but something darker, something deeper. "No," the figure finally replied, its voice a dark whisper that seemed to echo from every direction at once. "It's never just a forest." The fog seemed to pull closer, the trees leaning in, their twisted branches reaching toward him like hands, as though trying to grab him, pull him in. Sam's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The forest had been waiting for him, for the moment when it could claim him. He had wandered too far, crossed too many lines. Now, there was no going back. But then, something shifted. A flash of light, a burst of warmth. For a split second, the mist cleared, and Sam saw a figure in the distance, a person, standing near the edge of the clearing. It was a human form, but there was something strange about it. The figure didn't look afraid. It stood still, watching Sam with calm eyes, as though it had been waiting for him, too, as though it was guiding him, pulling him away from the clutches of the creature. The forest seemed to tremble, its grip loosening just enough for Sam to see the light in the distance. He couldn't stop himself. With a surge of hope, he pushed past the figure, running toward the light, towards the possible escape. The growl of the creature grew louder, more desperate, its claws scraping against the earth as it followed him, but Sam didn't stop. He had no choice. This was his only chance. The light grew brighter, and Sam sprinted toward it, his legs aching, his breath ragged, but the presence of the figure, the calming warmth, was close. He could feel the distance between him and the creature growing, but not fast enough. It wasn't enough. He had to reach it before the darkness consumed him again. But then, just as he reached the edge of the clearing, the light dimmed. The figure turned toward him, its face hidden in shadow, and Sam's heart lurched as he recognized the expression or lack thereof. The figure wasn't human. Its eyes glowed a cold blue now, and it wasn't the comforting presence he had hoped for. It was another thing, like the creature, an entity tied to the forest, to the very land he had tried to escape. The figure spoke, its voice eerily calm. "You cannot run from the forest. You are part of it now, just as I am." The words hit Sam like a blow, and he stopped in his tracks. His chest tightened, his lungs fighting for air as the weight of the truth settled over him. This was no ordinary forest. It was alive, feeding on fear, on those who ventured too deep, too far. It was ancient, and the creatures, the twisted figures that haunted it, were its servants, its guardians. The light flickered once more, and the figure stepped aside, revealing what lay beyond it. A dark path leading deeper into the heart of the forest. There, the trees grew more twisted, more gnarled, as though they had been scarred by time, by something older than memory. Sam felt the pull of the path. The forest was calling him, urging him to walk the last steps into its heart. The creature growled again, louder this time, its frustration palpable. But Sam knew, in that moment, that this wasn't just a fight for survival. This was something far deeper. The forest wanted him. The creature wanted him. The land had claimed him. And if he didn't stop running, if he didn't face it now, there would be nothing left of him to save. The figure in front of him, now more clearly defined in the light, reached out toward him with long, thin fingers, its eyes glowing brighter, pulling Sam closer. "Welcome home," it whispered. Sam's chest tightened, and for the first time, he realized just how deeply the forest had claimed him. The figure's chilling whisper echoed in his mind, a promise now, a decree. Welcome home. He wanted to scream, to fight, but something inside him resisted. Something deep within his gut told him that the more he fought, the more this place would twist him. The more he struggled, the more it would consume him. The figure's cold, glowing eyes bored into him. It was no longer just a shape in the fog. It was real, standing in front of him with all the presence of something ancient and timeless. Something that had existed long before the first humans set foot in the forest. The forest was its domain, and Sam was now its prey. "You cannot escape what is already inside you," the figure said, its voice thick with the weight of inevitability. "The forest speaks through you now, Sam. It has already begun." Sam staggered backward, his breath coming in short gasps. His mind reeled, as the weight of the figure's words sunk in. He could feel it now, like a weight on his chest, a pressure that was growing stronger, like the trees themselves were whispering inside his head, calling him toward the heart of the forest. No, this wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. He gripped his head, his hands trembling as he tried to hold on to his sanity. The whispers, the voices from the trees, they were getting louder. The fog around him thickened, and the ground beneath him shifted. He stumbled, falling to his knees, hands pressed against the earth, as if the forest itself was reaching up, pulling him into its depths. He tried to stand, to move, but his legs wouldn't obey. His body was heavy, like it was being dragged down by something unseen. He could feel the trees bending, the earth shifting, the world warping around him as the forest reached for him, claiming him, consuming him. A sudden burst of sound like a crack of thunder split the air, and Sam gasped. The fog parted for a split second, revealing the heart of the forest, a clearing that seemed to pulse with a sickening energy. The ground was alive. The trees were twisted and contorted, their branches curling like claws, reaching out to claim him. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone monolith, covered in moss and vines, its surface inscribed with strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The figure moved toward the monolith, its movements graceful, fluid, unnatural. Sam wanted to scream, to run, but his body was too numb, too paralyzed. He could feel the forest pulling him toward the stone, toward the center of it all, where the creature, the heart of the forest. "You belong to the forest now," the figure whispered again, its voice now a soft hum. "It feeds on your fear. You are the latest offering. The ritual has begun." The monolith thrummed with power, a deep vibration that seemed to reverberate through Sam's very bones. It was alive. It was feeding off him, feeding off his terror, and in turn, it was pulling him deeper into the web of the forest's influence. The fog parted again, and Sam saw something else. Figures, more figures, standing motionless at the edges of the clearing. Their eyes glowed in the dark, pale, empty, and hungry. Some were humanoid, but many were far more monstrous, distorted shapes that didn't belong to the world he knew. The forest had claimed them all, and now it was claiming him too. The figure at the monolith reached out, its long, thin fingers touching the stone. A pulse of energy shot through the air, and Sam felt it like a wave of electricity, a cold, empty sensation flooding through him. His body jerked, and his vision swam as the weight of the forest's power closed in on him. He could feel the roots of the trees, the very earth, pulling at him, sinking into him. The forest was consuming him, using him as a conduit for its ancient hunger. "No," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. "No, I won't." But it was too late. The ground beneath him cracked open, and the dark energy surged into him, pulling him toward the monolith. His body jerked violently, his breath coming in strangled gasps, as the force of the forest's power coursed through him, making him feel as though his very essence was being torn apart. He felt something inside him snap. Something shifted. "You are part of it now." The thought came like a whisper in his mind, and Sam could feel it. He could feel the forest, the creatures, the monolith. He could feel them all within him, like they were a part of him now, tangled in his blood, his soul. The forest had taken root in him, and there was no way out. With a final scream, Sam's vision went dark. Sam awoke to a world that was both familiar and utterly alien. His body ached, his muscles sore and trembling, but the pain was distant, almost as if it didn't belong to him. His mind felt foggy, clouded with a sense of confusion that he couldn't shake. His eyelids fluttered open, and he found himself lying on the cold, damp ground, surrounded by the dark, twisted trees of the forest. The mist was heavier now, swirling around him like it had a life of its own. The air was thick, suffocating, and every breath Sam took felt like it was filled with the weight of 1,000 secrets. The world around him was quiet, too quiet except for the faint hum that vibrated through the ground beneath him. He could feel it deep in his bones, the pulse of the forest, the slow thrum of something ancient and all-consuming. For a moment, Sam just lay there, trying to make sense of what had happened. His mind raced, pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place. The monolith, the figure, the creatures. They were all connected, all part of this thing that had claimed him. The forest, it wasn't just a place. It was alive, breathing, feeding on fear, drawing him deeper into its heart. It had been waiting for him. No. The thought cut through the fog in his mind. I can't let it win. But even as he tried to move, tried to push himself up, he realized something. He couldn't. His body felt heavy, unresponsive. He couldn't feel his legs. He couldn't move his arms. It was as if he was bound to the earth itself. The roots of the trees twisted around him, holding him in place. His breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. The forest had taken him. It wasn't just watching him anymore. He was part of it, just as the creatures were. He was tangled in the very web it had spun, a part of the ancient force that pulsed through the trees, through the earth. The figure, the one that had guided him, if it could even be called a guide, was standing in front of him now. Its tall, gaunt form looming over him like a shadow. Its eyes glowed, a soft, eerie green, and it tilted its head slightly as it gazed down at him. "You've come too far, Sam Jenkins," the figure said, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. It wasn't mocking him, nor was it comforting. There was no emotion in its voice, just cold, factual inevitability. Sam's throat burned as he tried to speak, but no words came. His mouth was dry, his tongue heavy in his mouth. It was like he couldn't find the strength to be in this place, to exist outside of the forest's will. The figure stepped closer, its long, thin fingers reaching toward him. Sam instinctively flinched, but the figure's hand didn't touch him. Instead, it hovered just above his chest, the space between them crackling with energy, or a dark energy that made Sam's skin crawl. "You belong to the forest now," the figure continued, its voice echoing in his mind, filling his head with an oppressive weight. "It feeds on you, and you feed on it. You are no longer separate from it. You are part of its pulse, part of its will. You have been chosen." The words struck him like a physical blow. Chosen. He wasn't here by accident. The forest had been waiting for him, had drawn him into its web on purpose, like a fly lured into the trap. It had watched him, followed him, and now it had claimed him. The figure's hand descended slowly, resting just above Sam's chest. Sam could feel it, then the presence of the forest itself, a weight that pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. It was inside him now, filling his veins, crawling into his mind, twisting his thoughts. The forest wasn't just around him, it was within him, an invasive force that wrapped around his soul. "No," Sam whispered, the word escaping his lips in a weak breath. I won't be a part of this." But the figure only tilted its head again, as if it were considering him. "You already are." The figure's voice was softer now, almost comforting in its finality. "There is no going back, Sam. The forest has claimed you. Your essence is part of it. It cannot be undone." The words echoed in his mind, reverberating in the air around him, until they became all he could hear. His chest constricted, his heart racing, as the weight of what the figure said sank in. The creature, the darkness in the forest, wasn't just hunting him. It wasn't just feeding on his fear. It was changing him, turning him into something else. Something part of it. He could feel it, now, the connection, the bond. The forest was alive in him, its roots extending deep into his soul, pulling at the very core of his being. The hungrit was inside him, feeding on his terror, drawing out the last remnants of his will. Sam closed his eyes, trying to block it out, trying to escape the suffocating pressure of it all. He tried to move again, to break free, but his body wouldn't obey him. He was trapped, stuck in this nightmarish landscape, unable to escape the forest's grasp. But then, he felt it. The faintest flicker of resistance. A spark. For a moment, the figure seemed to notice the shift in him, its gaze sharp and focused. It leaned in closer, its face twisting into something that almost resembled a smile though. It was more of a grimace, an expression of something ancient and terrible. "Fight, if you must," it said, almost pityingly. "But you will see. In the end, there is nothing but the forest. It is your home now. It is your body. It is your soul." Sam's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be some way to escape. He refused to become a part of this nightmare. But then, just as he was about to give in, to allow the forest to consume him entirely, something unexpected happened. A voice is uncut through the suffocating silence in his mind. "Fight. Don't let it win." It wasn't the creature's voice. It wasn't the forest's. It was his. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Sam felt the strength inside him, real, undeniable strength. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The forest pressed in around Sam, suffocating him, wrapping its dark tendrils tighter and tighter. The figure's words echoed in his mind like a distant, haunting whisper, but now, the truth of them felt less like a sentence and more like a challenge. "You are part of it now. You belong to the forest." But as the weight of that realization pressed against his chest, something in Sam snapped. He wasn't just going to accept it. Not like this. His body trembled with the effort, but deep within the suffocating grip of the forest, a small spark of defiance flared. It was faint, weak, but it was there. The figure stood above him, its cold eyes glowing with an unsettling light, watching as Sam struggled. The figure seemed almost pleased, its presence looming like a dark shadow over him. But as Sam's breath quickened, something shifted. The forest had been watching him, feeding off his fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. But for the first time, Sam's mind has wolfed back against the flood of darkness. He gasped for breath, the pressure in his chest lifting ever so slightly. The bond that had been forged between him and the forest, the one that had threatened to consume him, seemed to tremble. He could feel the forest's grip, its suffocating hold, faltering. "Fight." The voice in his head, the one he couldn't ignore, urged him forward. It was his voice, his own thoughts, clear and unwavering. The forest had wanted him to give in, to become a part of its dark pulse, its eternal hunger. But it hadn't counted on this, the spark of resistance, the strength of will that remained inside him. The forest might have tried to claim him, but Sam wasn't ready to surrender. With every ounce of strength he could summon, Sam forced his body to move. His muscles screamed in protest, his limbs heavy with the weight of the forest's hold. But he fought against it, clenching his fists and digging his fingers into the earth beneath him. The figure watched him with an expression of cruel amusement. "You cannot fight it. You are one with the forest now. There is nothing you can do." But Sam didn't listen to it. His mind was focused on one thing: freedom. His thoughts burned with the desire to break free, to reclaim what was left of himself, to escape the suffocating grip of the forest. With a low, strained cry, Sam pushed against the earth, pushing against the invisible chains that had bound him, his body trembling with every effort. The forest trembled with him, the air vibrating with the force of his will. And then, as if the very ground beneath him had heard his plea, the forest shifted. The trees groaned, their ancient branches creaking, as though they were being forced to move. The air around him thickened, crackling with energy, and for a moment, Sam thought he might collapse under the weight of it all. But then something snapped. A loud crack echoed through the clearing, and Sam's vision blurred. He felt a sharp jolt of pain shoot through his body, like the roots of the trees were being pulled from his very soul. It was as though the forest was rejecting him, as if it were trying to cast him aside, but he didn't stop. The figure hissed in frustration as Sam's grip on his own will tighten. He couldn't believe it. The forest had been feeding on him, but now the balance was shifting. Sam wasn't part of it. He never would be. With one final surge of strength, Sam stood, unsteady but determined. His body burned with the effort, but he forced himself upright, his back straight, his hands still clenched into fists. The forest had been pushing him toward the edge of something, the edge of himself. But now, he was fighting back. The figure's expression twisted with rage. "You think you can escape me? You think you can escape the forest?" Sam didn't respond. He couldn't. There was no more time for words. The forest was collapsing in on him, the darkness pressing in, but Sam was no longer afraid. He wasn't a part of it. Not anymore. He turned toward the clearing, the monolith still standing in the center, glowing faintly in the mist. The stone thrummed with power, still alive with the forest's influence, but Sam knew what he had to do. The monolith was the heart of the forest's power, the pulse that had kept it alive for centuries, and he had to destroy it. With a newfound strength, Sam pushed forward, forcing his legs to carry him toward the monolith. The ground beneath him seemed to shift, the trees closing in, their branches reaching for him like hands, trying to drag him back. But Sam didn't stop. He couldn't stop. His mind was focused only on one thing, the monolith, the source of it all, the beating heart of the forest. He reached at his hands, trembling as he touched the cold stone. The monolith's surface hummed with power, but Sam wasn't afraid. He felt the energy coursing through him. The forests were fighting against his own, but he fought back. His fingers found the cracks in the stone, the ancient seams that held it together. He pushed, his palms pressing against the cold surface, and he could feel the forest resist, feel it fighting to keep him from breaking its heart. Then, with a final push, Sam ripped the monolith from the earth. The ground trembled violently. The trees screamed in protest, their branches thrashing in the air, but it was too late. The bond had been broken. The forest had been severed. The creature's growl was deafening, a final, guttural roar that shook the very ground beneath Sam's feet, but it was fading. The dark force, the hunger, the pull of the forest, it was dying. The monolith, the heart of the forest, was gone. Sam stood there, panting, surrounded by the crashing silence of the forest. The air was thick, and the mist had started to lift. The oppressive weight of the trees began to recede. The creatures, the shadows, all of it, fading. He wasn't part of it anymore. He was free. But the cost of his freedom was not yet clear. The creature the forest had been destroyed, but what would be left? And who else had it claimed before him? For now, Sam knew one thing. The forest had taken everything from him, but it had not taken his will. It never would. He walked away from the clearing, leaving the remains of the monolith behind, knowing the darkness would no longer follow. The ground beneath Sam's feet still trembled as he took a step back from the ruins of the monolith. The silence that followed the collapse of the stone felt like an open wound, empty, hollow, and painfully loud. The trees, once oppressive and alive with the forest's influence, now stood still, their twisted branches unmoving, as though the life had been drained from them. The fog that had hung so thickly around him was lifting, retreating back into the dark corners of the woods. The weight that had pressed down on him was gone, but it had left something else in its wake, a deep sense of loss, a void that he couldn't quite explain. Sam's legs shook beneath him as he stumbled backward, his hands still pressed against the cold earth where the monolith had been. His fingers ached from the effort of pulling the stone free. He felt different. Lightheaded wasn't the right word, but it was close. The forest had been so heavy on him for so long, its darkness pressing against his mind, his body, that now, in the absence of it, he felt almost unmoored, adrift in a world that no longer seemed quite real. The sound of leaves rustling brought him back to reality, snapping him out of the daze. It wasn't the soft whisper of the wind. It was the sound of movement, of something heavy shifting through the underbrush. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat, the remnants of panic rising like bile in his chest. The fog had cleared enough for him to see what was coming. The creature, the thing that had been hunting him, was still alive, but it was different now, weaker, as if the life force that had sustained it had been stripped away. It staggered forward, its movements jerky, unnaturally slow, its twisted form barely holding itself together. Its eyes were dull now, the glowing yellow of before, flickering like a dying flame, and its limbs hung at odd angles, the unnatural bend of its body no longer held by the forest's power. Sam watched it for a moment, his mind racing. He had done it. He had broken the forest's hold over him, but at what cost? The creature, or whatever it was still here. It hadn't been vanquished. The forest's pulse had stopped, but the echoes of its power lingered in the air, and in the thing that had once been its guardian. The creature stumbled toward him, its mouth opening with a ragged growl, but there was no urgency to its movements. It was no longer the predator, the hunter. It was just a shadow of what it had been, a remnant of the forest's will, a dying thing that no longer had the strength to chase him. Sam stood still, his breath steady now, his pulse slowing. He had won, but the victory felt hollow. The creature was a symbol of everything that had been wrong with the forest, and now, as it limped toward him, Sam could see the truth. It was just a reflection of the forest itself. The forest, the thing that had tried to consume him, was dead. Its heart had been torn out, and in the process, everything tied to it had begun to unravel. He couldn't help it. He felt a brief flicker of pity as he watched the creature struggle. It wasn't alive anymore, not in any real sense. It was a thing, a remnant of an ancient hunger that had been fed for centuries. And now, it was dying, just like the forest. Sam's hand tightened on the knife at his belt, his fingers still trembling from the adrenaline. He wasn't sure why, but he felt the need to end it, to make sure the creature, the forest, everything connected to it, was truly gone. With one swift motion, Sam advanced, his steps quiet in the damp earth. The creature looked up at him, its yellow eyes now dim and fading. It growled one last time, a sound that was more pain than threat. Without hesitation, Sam raised the knife, and with a single, forceful strike, he ended it. The creature's body went limp, crumpling to the ground in a heap, the last remnants of its life extinguished. In an instant, the mist began to lift in earnest now, the fog rolling back into the trees, and for the first time, Sam could see the forest clearly. The twisted trees, the gnarled branches, the dark paths, they were still there, but they were empty now, hollow. The forest was no longer a place of darkness and hunger. It was just a forest. Sam stood over the creature, breathing heavily, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. The forest was gone, but there was nothing left to fill the void. He took a step back, looking around at the empty expanse of trees. The stillness around him now, a stark contrast to the weight of fear that had pressed on him for so long. It was over. The creature, the darkness, the power that had haunted Hemet was all gone. But the price had been high. Sam turned, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was no sign of the figure, no sign of any other presence in the forest. The stillness had returned, but there was no comfort in it. The forest had claimed him, had nearly consumed him, but he had fought back. He had won. But now, as the fog lifted, he realized that winning had left him with more questions than answers. The forest had been an entity, a force, feeding off those who wandered too deep, and he had been one of those lost souls. But now, as he walked away from the clearing, he knew that no matter how far he went, no matter how many miles he put between himself and this cursed place, the forest would always be a part of him. The darkness would linger in the corners of his mind, and he would carry its weight with him forever. But that was the price of freedom. And as he stepped back into the clearing, away from the fading remnants of the forest, Sam couldn't help but wonder what if it wasn't over. Sam trudged through the fog, his steps slow and unsteady, the weight of everything that had happened pressing heavily on his shoulders. The forest was quiet now, unnervingly so. The oppressive, suffocating presence that had clung to every corner of his mind for so long had finally lifted. But something else had replaced it, a hollow, unsettling silence that made Sam's skin crawl. It was as if the forest was waiting, watching, biding its time before the next thing would come. His heart still raced from the battle, from the struggle against the darkness that had nearly consumed him. The victory should have been sweet, but all it had left him with was emptiness. He had killed the creature. He had torn out the heart of the forest. But now, as he walked through the silent, dead trees, Sam realized that the forest had left a permanent mark on him. The creatures were gone. The whispers had stopped. The pull of the forest's hunger had receded, but Sam could still feel it in the back of his mind, a faint echo, like a distant memory of something that had never fully left. He could almost hear the faintest rustle of leaves beneath his feet, a reminder that even though the forest had been subdued, it had not truly disappeared. He paused for a moment, the weight of the fog thick in the air. His breath formed a mist in front of him as he stood still, listening to the world around him. The wind, once wild and chaotic, was now eerily gentle, as though the forest was breathing in unison with him. Sam turned around, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The trees stood still, their twisted branches stretching upward like dark, skeletal fingers, their trunks gnarled and worn. Was it really over? The thought gnawed at him. Sam's gaze swept over the clearing, where the remnants of the monolith lay, the stone shattered, its power long gone. He had destroyed the heart of the forest, but it felt like he had only cut a branch from a tree that would grow back in time. The forest had always been here. It always would be. His eyes fell to the ground, where dark, wet earth greeted him. The air was still, but there was a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. He could sense it, the feeling that something was watching him, waiting for him to make the wrong move. He shivered involuntarily, instinct telling him to leave, to run far away, but his feet were frozen to the spot. Suddenly, a low, groaning sound filled the air, like the forest itself was sighing. Sam's breath caught, and he slowly turned around, his eyes scanning the trees. At first, he thought it was just the wind, just the creaking of the ancient trees, but then, he saw it. A movement in the distance, a shadow. It was barely a shape, a dark figure moving between the trees, but it was there. It was real. Sam's heart skipped a beat. The creature? No. This was different. This was something, someone, a figure, humanoid, its movements slow, deliberate. It didn't seem to be coming toward him, but it wasn't leaving either. The figure lingered, just beyond the edge of the trees, watching him from the mist. Sam's legs felt like stone as he slowly backed away, his eyes fixed on the figure, every instinct in his body screaming at him to run, to escape. He didn't know if it was friend or foe, if it was another manifestation of the forest's hunger, or something else entirely. But as he watched it, something about the figure felt familiar. It didn't move. It just watched. And then, the mist parted ever so slightly, and Sam could see its face. It was human, but not entirely. The figure's features were twisted, like it had been pulled from the depths of the forest itself. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and the eyes, dark and unblinking, glimmered like the shadows that surrounded them. The mouth was too wide, twisted into a grotesque, hollow grin. But the thing that struck Sam the most was the expression or lack thereof. It wasn't threatening, nor was it friendly. It was empty. It was as if this figure had been carved out of the same thing that had consumed him, the forest, the creatures, the hunger. A voice whispered through Sam's mind, not loud, but unmistakable. "You should not have come here." The words were chilling, filled with an emotion Sam couldn't place. It wasn't anger or hatred. It wasn't even fear. It was something deeper. A sense of loss, of fate. Sam's hands trembled, but he forced himself to stand firm. He had fought the forest. He had broken its hold over him. He wouldn't let it take him now. "You're not real," Sam whispered to the figure, more to convince himself than anything. "You're part of it. You're part of this place." The figure tilted its head, its hollow eyes narrowing. It didn't speak, but the message was clear. The forest had changed him. "We are one now." The voice was not a whisper this time. It was as if the figure itself spoke through the trees, through the very air around him. It was a part of him, a reflection of his deepest fears. The figure wasn't just an entity, it was the forest, a manifestation of everything that had tried to take Sam, a part of the forest that lived within him. Sam felt the forest pulse beneath his feet, and in that moment, he understood. It wasn't just the creatures. It wasn't just the trees. The forest had changed him, had woven its roots through his soul, had planted itself in his heart. And no matter how far he ran, no matter how much he fought, it would always be a part of him. The figure stepped back into the fog, vanishing without a trace, leaving Sam alone in the clearing. For the first time, Sam realized the truth. The forest had not just taken his fear, his body, his soul. It had taken his will. And now, it was a part of him. Sam stood alone in the clearing, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths as the realization washed over him. The forest had won not through force, but through something far more insidious. It had marked him, woven itself into the very fibers of his being, until there was no separating him from it. He was part of it now, whether he accepted it or not. The fog clung to the ground, curling around his boots, and the trees stood silent, watching him with their gnarled limbs. They weren't just trees anymore. They were ancient sentinels, guardians of something far darker, something older than any human had ever comprehended. And Sam had become a part of that ancient, living entity. "We are one now." The words echoed in his mind, sent shivers through his spine, and yet they carried no malice, no sense of triumph. It was an acceptance. The forest wasn't angry with him. It didn't need to be. It had claimed him, without struggle, without force. It had been patient, waiting for the moment when his resistance would falter. And now that moment had come. He reached for his chest, as if to hold on to something that might still be there. Some shred of humanity, some spark of the man he had been. But his skin felt different, hollow, like it no longer belonged to him. The air around him buzzed with energy, like static in the air, vibrating with the pulse of something alive. The forest, it was alive. And now, it was inside him. Sam's hands trembled as he stumbled backward, looking desperately for some way out. But the mist was thick, the trees closing in around him, their branches twisting, curling, like fingers that sought to embrace him. The ground trembled beneath him, the roots of the trees shifting like serpents beneath the earth. The pulse, deep and resonant, thudded in his chest, like the heartbeat of the forest, and Sam felt it in every part of him. It was inside his blood, in his veins, in the very marrow of his bones. The forest had become his own heartbeat. He wasn't sure how long he had been standing there, paralyzed by the magnitude of what had happened. The fog shifted, swirling around him, the oppressive silence pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't escape. For the first time, Sam wasn't sure what was real anymore. The world had changed, had become part of something other, and he was now tethered to it, chained to its will. He thought of the creatures of the twisted figures, the creatures that had stalked him, each one a reflection of the forest's hunger. He thought of the monolith, the ancient stone that had once thrummed with the forest's power, and the figure that had guided him, that had whispered the truth in his ear. He had destroyed the heart of the forest, but in doing so, he had only become it. The faint rustling of leaves broke through the silence. Sam's head snapped toward the sound, his heart leaping in his chest, but there was nothing. Not a single figure, not a creature, not a thing. The trees had returned to their stillness, but Sam knew better. The creatures weren't gone. They were part of him now, like shadows that lurked in the corners of his mind. He could feel their hunger, their presence, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, pushing him toward the forest's core. He was its keeper now, bound by the pulse of its life. "You cannot escape, Sam Jenkins." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a whisper in the wind, a murmur in his mind. It wasn't the forest speaking to him directly, it was the forest through him. The connection was complete. It was inside him, and he was inside it. He was no longer a visitor here. He had become part of it. Sam wanted to scream, wanted to fight back, but his voice felt distant, as if it didn't belong to him. His chest tightened as the realization sank deeper. There was no escape. Not now. The forest was his now, and he was part of it, bound by its eternal pulse. He fell to his knees, the fog swirling around him like a living thing. His vision blurred as the weight of it all pressed in on him. The trees stretched higher and higher, their branches folding over him like a canopy, enclosing him in a cage made of living wood. His hands trembled as he reached toward the earth, feeling the pulse of the forest beneath his fingertips. The earth was warm, alive, feeding. It felt like everything in the forest was breathing with him, its roots connecting with his very soul. "You are part of it now," the words whispered again, but this time, Sam didn't resist. He couldn't. He had crossed the line, had stepped too far into the heart of this nightmare, and now, there was no going back. The forest wasn't just a place. It was alive, and Sam had become its heart. Sam couldn't tell how long he had been kneeling in the fog. Time felt like it had slowed, and the very air around him seemed to thrum with energy. Like the heartbeat of the forest itself was resonating in his chest. He was no longer sure where the forest ended and he began. The lines had blurred until there was nothing but the pulse, the constant, unrelenting pulse that flowed through the earth, through the trees, through his veins. His body ached, as though it were being reshaped from the inside out. The forests were carving into his soul. He had been marked. The forest had claimed him, and now there was no separating him from it. The power of the land coursed through him, but it wasn't just power, it was hunger, an insatiable longing that filled him, that stretched beyond his body, beyond his mind. And yet, there was no fear. There was no panic. The forest had done what it always did. It had consumed, and now it was him. As the last remnants of his resistance fell away, Sam realized that he wasn't alone anymore. The figures, the creatures surrounded him, just beyond the edges of the mist, their glowing eyes watching him with a cold, predatory focus. They had been his captors, his tormentors, but now they were part of him too. The air shifted, and for a fleeting moment, the fog parted enough for Sam to see the trees surrounding him, their gnarled limbs swaying, their roots stretching into the ground like the fingers of an ancient god. The forest was alive. It was whole again, and Sam was a part of it. But as he looked around, he saw something new, something that hadn't been there before. The monolith, the heart of the forest, loomed before him, its surface still cracked from the battle he had waged. The cracks pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, and Sam could feel the energy radiating from it, calling to him. It wasn't just a structure. It was a conduit, a channel that connected the forest to the very essence of the earth, to the life force that sustained it. And now, as Sam stood there, rooted to the earth by the weight of the forest's pulse, he could feel the monolith's pull. It was part of him, now, and through it, Sam could feel the forest reaching out to him, beckoning him deeper into its heart. You are the keeper now. You are its heart. The voice was not in his mind. It was in the trees, in the ground beneath him, in the very fabric of the air he breathed. It wasn't just the forest speaking. It was him, Sam, the forest's new heart, its new pulse. His body had become one with it, and now his soul would feed it. The creatures, his former tormentors, gathered around him, bowing in reverence. They were not his enemies anymore. They were his servants, bound by the same force that had once bound him. The figures, now clearly visible in the mist, were no longer the twisted horrors that had hunted him. They were his people, part of the forest's will, just like him. He stepped forward, his feet sinking into the earth, his fingers brushing the monolith. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy shot through his body. It wasn't pain, it wasn't anything he had ever felt before. It was the raw force of the earth, of the forest, of life itself, and it filled him, pushing through him like a flood, overwhelming him. Sam's breath hitched, his vision blurred, then cleared. The fog began to part, the trees stretching their limbs out into the open air, their roots spreading beneath the earth like veins. He could feel the forest in every direction, every corner of it, every crack in the earth. He was connected to it all. And then, just as the sensation began to overwhelm him, he felt the presence, the figure, the one who had saved him, the one who had led him to the heart of the forest. But now, the figure was no longer the same. It was no longer a guardian or a guide. It had become something else. It was the forest itself. "You are no longer Sam Jenkins," the figure whispered, its voice like a soft breeze. "You are the keeper. You are the heart." Sam's eyes widened as the words struck him like a hammer. The weight of them settled into his chest, and a deep, ancient understanding washed over him. He had never been just a man in the forest. He had always been part of the forest, from the very beginning. It had just taken this moment, this destruction of his old self, to finally claim him completely. This is my fate. The realization hit him hard, but there was no fear now. There was only understanding. The forest was no longer something that hunted him. It was a part of him. His role in it was not just as a victim, not as a prey, but as a keeper. The monolith had called to him. The creatures had led him here. And now, he was the forest's protector, its heart. He could feel the creatures surrounding him, but they weren't watching him as they had before. They were waiting. They were ready for their new purpose. Sam stepped back from the monolith, feeling the weight of the decision settle around him. This was it. He was no longer the man he had once been. He was something else. Something ancient. Something that would never die. The forest would continue. It would grow. It would feed. And Sam, as its keeper, would ensure it remained alive. "Welcome home," the voice of the forest whispered again. And for the first time, Sam embraced it. The fog cleared completely, and the air around Sam seemed to settle into a strange, eerie calm. The trees, once twisted and threatening, now stood tall and majestic in the silent expanse, their branches reaching up toward the sky like the arms of ancient gods. The ground beneath his feet hummed with energy, an unearthly pulse that resonated deep in his bones. He could feel it, the heartbeat of the forest, the rhythm that kept everything in balance. And now, he was its heart. His mind, once filled with confusion and fear, was now clear. The connection to the forest was undeniable, overwhelming, but it was no longer terrifying. It was natural. He had become one with it, and it had become a part of him. The creatures, his people, stood in the clearing, their eyes glowing softly, waiting for him. They had been his tormentors, the twisted guardians of the forest. But now they were his servants, bound to him, to the forest's will. They would follow his command, uphold the balance, and protect the sacred land they all shared. Sam looked around, taking in the vast, ancient forest that stretched endlessly before him. The trees, the fog, the pulse, they were all his responsibility now. He was no longer a man who had wandered into the woods. He was its protector, its keeper. He had given everything to the forest, but in return, the forest had given him power. The power to control the land, to protect it from those who would seek to harm it, the power to ensure its survival for generations to come. And yet, a part of him wondered what had he truly given up. The forest had taken his humanity, but in exchange, it had made him eternal. He would never grow old, never wither, never die. He would always be part of the forest, always bound to its pulse, its heart, and that, in itself, was both a blessing and a curse. He took a step forward, the ground shifting beneath him, and the creatures moved with him, following his lead. Their movements were fluid, graceful, as if they were part of him, just as the forest was. Sam felt a strange comfort in their presence. He wasn't alone anymore. He never would be again. The trees seemed to whisper around him, the sounds soft and distant, like the voices of the forest itself. They spoke in a language older than time, words that Sam couldn't understand, but that didn't matter. He could feel their meaning in his soul. The forest was alive, and now he was its keeper. The forest had claimed him, and in return, he would protect it. But with the power came the burden. The creatures once his captors, now his followers would need guidance. The balance of the forest was delicate, and one wrong move could tip it into chaos. He had to make the right choices, the right sacrifices, if he wanted to ensure the forest's survival. There could be no room for error. Sam felt the weight of his new role settle onto his shoulders. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sustaining life, about maintaining the ancient, delicate ecosystem of the forest. He had been chosen for this. He had been transformed for this. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, and Sam felt the pull of the darkness. The creatures that had once been twisted horrors now moved with purpose, their eyes focused on the path ahead. He turned, leading them deeper into the forest, toward the heart of it all. As he walked, he could feel the forest shifting again, the ancient trees bending and groaning with age. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth, of something alive. And as Sam walked with the creatures at his side, he knew that the forest's heart was beating, not just in the trees, but in him. He was the forest now. He was its protector, its keeper, its pulse. But even as he embraced this new life, Sam couldn't shake the thought that haunted him, the same thought that had followed him since he first stepped foot in the forest. What would become of him now? The forest had taken everything from him, but it had given him something in return. And with that eternity came responsibility, a burden that would never truly be his to escape. He looked back once, just once, to see the clearing where the monolith had once stood, where the heart of the forest had pulsed. It was gone now, shattered, its power stripped away. But in its place, something new was growing, something alive, a new force, a new heart, beating in the depths of the earth. And Sam, the keeper of the forest, knew that he would always be bound to it. He had become one with the darkness, one with the pulse of the land. There would be no going back, no return to what he had been. The forest was his, and he was the forest's, forever.